These stories are taken from the book Road and Rail by George. One day, George the steamroller grumbled all the way to the old branch line. He was going to turn it into a road. Percy is taking him there, and George did not like it one bit. Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. When they arrived, George was rude again. Bumpy ride on rotten rails. I'm glad it's over. So am I, said Percy. Huh, huffed George. Percy was still fuming when he met Thomas. What's up, Percy? It's George. He makes me feel down. Just ignore him, puffed Thomas. George was now enjoying himself. Ripping out rails, he chortled. What a life. What do you think of this, Thomas? Thomas took no notice. George felt insulted. You are a useless blue pop ball, he shouted, but Thomas didn't hear him. I'll show him who's boss. At last the workmen reached the level crossing. What shall we do here? Tear it up, tarmac it, said George. So they did, but not properly, and George knew it. Later, Thomas was traveling home on the same line. He was pulling trucks filled with vegetables. The signalman who had fallen asleep had forgotten to warn him about the crossing. That's nice, we don't need to stop, said Thomas happily. Yes, we do, called his driver. But it was too late. Thomas slides off the rails, rolls down the hill, and crashes into a barn. Next day, Percy told Gordon all about George. Huh, snorted Gordon. You're just a small engine, that's why he's rude to you. He wouldn't dare cause me any trouble. But Gordon spoke too soon. George had been taken to some yards to work. Then Duck arrived with a train of empty trucks. George was blocking his way, and the last truck was stuck on the main line. Let me through, demanded Duck. I'm too busy, you will just have to wait. There's no time to wait. I must clear my trucks away from the main line to let Gordon through. Pa, then he will have to wait too, said George. Duck's driver went to complain to the station master, but the signalman had already switched the points and set the signal to allow Gordon to speed through. His passengers were singing his praises, and he was making express time. I'm the greatest, just watch me fly by, he whistled long and loud as he approached the station. Suddenly, he saw a truck on the line ahead. Get out of my way! But the truck wouldn't move, until Gordon forced it by accident. The truck violently came off the track and smashed to pieces. Gordon was worried that the Fat Controller would be cross. He was, but not with Gordon. Whoever caused this disturbance will have me to answer to. And he did, a few days later. Look who's here, said Thomas. George had been found out by the Fat Controller and punished. He looked miserable. Now we'll get some peace at last, said Percy. I want to get rolling again, but I got to wait for a few months until I do. And then you'll be just as rude as ever. Eh, George? I hope not. Don't you? Horrid Lorries. One morning, Percy was late to the docks. Cranky the Crane was quick to criticize. These ships can't be kept waiting. They have important cargo. If they miss the tide, there will be delay at the docks. You should look up to the ships and show more respect. You are, after all, only little. We got too much work, huffed Percy. Then perhaps a lorry should do your job. I heard the Fat Controller was ordering some to ease the workload. Percy was shocked. He told the other engines what Cranky had said. Stuff and nonsense, snorted James. We engines run this island, said Henry. What if a lorry does arrive? I'm afraid it did, along with two more. They'll be helping out to ease the workload. Make them feel welcome. I will, Percy said, nervously. Cranky was delighted and began to tease him. Hey you down there, your job's done now, these lorries are taking over. One of them wants to talk to you. Lorry 1 was very rude. What's that steaming lumber scrap iron doing here? Be off with you. Scrap iron? Steaming scrap iron? Pah! A little later, Percy met Thomas and James. The same lorry was being rude to them. Then he saw Percy. Oh look, it's a little green goblin on wheels. You'll be scrap. Just you wait and see. Well, bust my buffers. What a horrid lorry, exclaimed Thomas. Despicable, agreed James. The next engine to meet a lorry was Toby. Well, 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 Lorry 2 said. No wonder this railway is in a mess. You belong in a museum, not working in the quarry. I may look old, but I'm very useful. Useful, pah. Just you tootle off. Tootle? Stuttered Toby. Come along, Toby, interrupted his driver. Don't bother to argue with him. We'll go to the flour mill instead. Toby was shocked to see yet another lorry at the flour mill. What are you doing here? We three are doing your work now. You're too slow, said Lorry 3. The foreman spoke to Toby's driver. I'm sorry, times are changing, I'm afraid. Toby might be old, replied his driver, but he's reliable. Come on, Toby, we'll go to the farms. They still news us. Toby trundled sadly away. The tramway runs alongside some narrow roads. Vehicles had to be careful, especially at speed. When Toby arrived, he saw the lorry from the quarry again. It was loaded with rocks and going at a dangerous speed. That lorry's going to end up in trouble, said Toby. And he was. Lorry 2 came around the bend much too fast. It went down the slope until it crashed straight into some big rocks. The driver managed to jump clear. Rotten roads, he muttered. The wrecked lorry was taken to the docks. Percy looked at the lorry. What's this lump of steaming scrap iron, he teased. I'll be back, replied Lorry 2, so that you can wipe that silly smile off your smoke box. Ha, said Percy, and he wished him loudly. Then Butch, the breakdown vehicle, arrived. He was towing Lorry 3 from the flour mill. What happened? Asked Toby's driver. He was overloaded with flour, came Butch, and he broke down. Not that very useful now, are you? Said Toby. Grr, replied the lorries. Then James whistled excitedly. Look, they're bringing in a dirt lorry on a barge. What happened to that one? James asked. That silly lorry was reversing himself and fell straight into the sea, said the tow truck man. Later, Thomas arrived with the fat controller. He looked at the three lorries and laughed. Well, 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 the brothers Grimm, smashed, broken, and sunk. The fat controller's message to the lorries was short, but not sweet. The lorries didn't return, and the engines now work even harder to make sure they will never return. Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry. Thomas the Tank Engine is bringing a load down to the harbour near his branch line. His load was to go onto a cargo ship. The ship was scheduled to depart at sundown. Thomas had to get to the harbour before then, but the load was very heavy. So Thomas puffed as hard as he could. He pulled so hard he broke his coupling rods. He wasn't going anywhere. Oh dear, I will be late, Thomas said. His driver saw an old shed near the track. If there's a telephone in there, I could call for help, he said. Hurry, and be careful, it looks spooky. Then a voice boomed from inside the shed. Do you mind? I'm trying to sleep. Thomas hoped it wasn't a ghost. Then his driver appeared. Is it a ghost? Asked Thomas nervously. It's a surprise, his driver teased. Then the fireman took some of Thomas's coal and headed off to the shed. She could get us to the fitter's yard, his driver said, if her boiler holds, added the fireman anxiously. What kind of surprise is that? Thomas wondered. Thomas, meet Elizabeth, said his driver. At last the doors opened and out chuffed a dirty, grimy steam lorry. So you're the little puffer that's broken down, she sniffed. Thomas was cross. And you're just an old steam lorry, he retorted. That would be vintage steam lorry, snapped Elizabeth, and I haven't much time to get your coupling rods. The driver was concerned. Elizabeth was making awful grinding sounds. She's not built for hills, he said anxiously. You're losing steam, he called. Just catching my breath, Elizabeth chuffed. And finally she made it. When Elizabeth returned with Thomas's coupling rods, she was pleased with herself. And next time, don't be so careless, she scolded. Thomas thought Elizabeth was the rudest lorry he had ever met, but he was very happy to get his new coupling rods. Elizabeth decided to follow Thomas to the harbour. That little puffer has already broken one coupling rod, so he may well need my help again, she thought. Elizabeth's engines rattled and groaned as she slowly followed behind Thomas. Soon Thomas was out of sight, but Elizabeth didn't mind. She remembered which road she had to take to get to the harbour. Thomas made it there just in time. What took you so long? Said the Fat Controller. Thomas told him about his broken coupling rods. He wanted to tell him how rude Elizabeth had been when she rolled up. Oh, it's you, said Elizabeth, looking down at the Fat Controller. Have you learned to drive properly yet? She's for it now, said Thomas to his driver. Elizabeth, said the Fat Controller fondly. My first lorry. I thought you had been lost. They were old friends. It was too much for Thomas. Then Elizabeth told the Fat Controller how she had been left in the shed for years. The Fat Controller was so pleased Elizabeth had been found, he asked Jem Cole to restore her to her original beauty. And soon Elizabeth had a rich dark colour and gleaming coachworks. You're the grandest lorry in the whole railway, the Fat Controller said proudly. I know, said Elizabeth even more proudly, and Thomas had to agree. She did look grand. Bulgy rides again. In the summertime, the engines are happy to show holidaymakers the wonderful sights to be seen. But this year, there was a problem. Thomas and Duck were in the foundry for repairs. I need to find a way to carry more passengers, grumbled the Fat Controller. We have more holidaymakers, and fewer engines, said Duck. Well, it looks like it's a double-decker problem, added Thomas. A double-decker problem? This gave the Fat Controller an idea. He drove straight to Bulgy's field. Bulgy is a double-decker bus. He was turned into a henhouse after he caused the silly accident. Good news, Bulgy. I'm putting you back on the road. Thank you, sir. I'll be the best bus ever. Bulgy never liked being a henhouse anyway. The next day, he went to the foundry. Duck was surprised to see him. Bulgy, exclaimed Duck. What are you doing here? I'm being repaired. I'm going back on the road. I changed my ways after all these years. Well, it's about time, said Duck. I notice your change of attitude every time I pass you. I think you'll be helping the new farmer, said Thomas. He needs to deliver his vegetables around the island. Vegetables? Huh. I'm going to carry passengers. Soon Bulgy was refitted inside and out. He looked smart and shiny. Even James was impressed. Ooh. When Bulgy returned to his field, the hens thought their old house looked splendid. We'll start in the morning, said his driver. You stay here tonight. Bulgy was soon fast asleep, but the hens missed their old home. One by one, they crept aboard and went to sleep in the luggage racks. Bulgy knew nothing. The next morning, Bulgy picked up lots of passengers. All aboard, he tooted, and set off for the station. He was driving so smoothly that the hens didn't wake up. All was well until Bulgy turned the corner. Trevor, the traction engine, was pulling a hay cart. Get out of my way! He overtook Trevor. Bulgy swerved to avoid hitting the vehicle traveling in the opposite direction. The hens woke up, the passengers panicked, and Bulgy's driver lost control. The hens were frightened. They flapped, they squawked. "Stop!" cried Bulgy's passengers. "We want to get off!" The passengers were covered in feathers and broken eggs. They were very cross. "This bus is full of hens," they complained. "It's not my fault," sulked Bulgy. The Fat Controller was informed and sent Bulgy to be clean. "Silly hens, silly passengers, you can have them both." The farmer still needs help with his vegetables," said Thomas. "A vegetable bus? That's not such a bad idea. And we're back carrying passengers," smiled Duck. Bulgy is happy now. He has new green paintwork and a smart serving catch. The Fat Controller agreed that he could become the island's only vegetable stand on wheels. Bulgy likes carrying vegetables. They don't lay eggs, and they never complain.